Hello and welcome to this telecoms.com webinar produced in association with the Now Factory. I'm James Middleton, Managing Editor of telecoms.com, and today I'm joined by Paul Colgan, who's Chief Technology Officer at the Now Factory, and he's going to talk about optimizing and monetizing your LTE investment. It is said that history is written by the victors, and with the move to LTE well underway, operators would be wise to heed the lessons of the past. LTE deployments are rapidly increasing on a global scale. The GSA reports that 361 firm LTE network deployments are planned or in progress in 114 countries, including 163 networks which are commercially launched in 67 countries. There's no doubt that LTE is the fastest developing mobile system for technology ever and is now mainstream. The total number of LTE subscriptions worldwide reached 68.33 million in the fourth quarter of 2012. But this development has put operators under increased pressure to deliver on the promise of greater speed, capacity and performance, whilst maximising return on investment. 4G brings significant expectations from users in terms of experience, and users today are far more educated than they used to be, with tools like speed test very commonly used. To avoid common mistakes when migrating to new LTE networks, operators are advised to look at the move to 3G and the lessons learned, especially those related to customer level visibility. Although with 3G carriers could see what was happening on the networks at a global level, they don't really have the granular insight into how users were being affected individually. Look at it this way. Just over a year ago, Dan Hesse, the CEO of major US carrier Sprint, commented that improvement in churn is the quickest, fastest, most significant way of improving your bottom line. Although operators are rightly focusing on growing ARPU and average customer spend with somewhat limited results, winning the loyalty of existing customers and extending their stay on the network plays a strong role in maximizing customer profitability. Churn is a serious issue for the vast majority of operators. It has steadily increased on a global scale in recent years, from 3% in 2009 to 3.5% at the end of 2010 and almost 3.9% towards the end of 2011, hitting a high of just over 4% in September 2012 before dropping back again to 3.7% at the end of last year. Obviously, no carrier wants to see their valuable subscribers move to competitor networks. Yet it's only recently that operators have changed tack to focus on building a relationship with the end user in order to actively prevent churn rather than retain customers in a reactive last-ditch attempt. The solution, which is something Paul will talk about, is to build out networks in a customer-centric model. This means that when any network issues happen, the operator knows who's been impacted, what the issues are, and what the impact is. In the not too distant past, operators were slow to react to customer sentiment, as the touchstones between the provider and the customer were few and far between. The most common interaction coming at the end of the customer's life cycle, when it was already too late to act. Yet as technology has evolved, those touchpoints have grown more frequent, pushing customer experience center stage. This is reflected, etymologically speaking, in the transition from customer relationship management to customer experience management. The argument is that to deliver an unrivaled customer experience during the lifespan of the customer relationship, not just when selling to them or trying to stop them churning, an operator must prioritize the needs of that customer throughout the organization. This is in the culture, the structure, technologies and business processes the operator employs. When networks got complaints on 3G about lack of service, they couldn't take into account the device or apps the user was actually using, for example. Whereas now, a custom-centric network can help the operator adjust churn, engineering resources, call costs, and higher call volumes, all from a resources and costs perspective. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Paul. He's going to be available after his presentation to take your questions. You can ask them at any time just by typing them into the text box on the main page of this webinar, and he will answer in real time. But Paul is going to talk about the most common mistakes network operators have made in the past in migrating to new mobile technologies, and how operators can apply the lessons from those mistakes to ensure a smooth rollout of their LTE networks, as well as the value of putting the customer at the heart of the LTE network and delivering a best-in-class customer experience. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, James. Good morning, afternoon and evening to everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen in today. My name is Paul Colgan and I am the CTO with the Now Factory. Looking at our agenda for today, we are going to cover the move to 3G, the most common mistakes that were made and their subsequent impact. I'm going to look at them from two different categories. One being managing the customer expectations, and then the second point being the fundamental business model. Within both of those categories, we're going to look at what learnings can we make from these mistakes, and then how do we apply these learnings as we migrate to LTE. And then finally, we're going to have a short Q&A session at the very end to answer any questions you might have. As you can see, the move to LTE is very much underway. 165 commercial networks have launched, and 415 operators are investing in LTE currently. It involves very significant upfront investment. It has very high customer expectations in terms of throughput, in terms of the additional capacity and what they're going to get as they migrate from 3G to LTE. However, there's also a lot of pressure on margins within the operator at this time as well as we move towards LTE, and so there needs to be much more of a focus on profitability, and that's where my second category around the fundamental business model comes in. And because of that additional pressure, there's obviously less scope for mistakes when you compare it to 3G, and that's the key point that we're trying to put across today. For today's discussion, as I said previously, I've taken two generic categories to measure the successes and group some of the common mistakes experienced during the global 3G rollout. Principally, as I said before, this is managing customer expectations, and then the second category being the actual business model itself. Now, these categories could be used for any product launch in any sector. But in order for the context of today's discussion, I'm going to expand on a number of examples in each of these two categories, discuss their impacts and how they were mitigated successfully, by and large, within 3G, and then most importantly, how their associated learnings can then be taken forward into our LTE and EPC rollouts. 3G was sold on the promise of mobile data at fixed line or broadband speeds, for everyone, everywhere, at all times. Now, there are a few key words in that sentence that I'm going to focus on for the next moment or two. Namely, they are speed, mobile data, everyone and everywhere. If we go back to 2003, 2005, when 3G networks were being deployed globally in earnest, it was assumed that if you monitored all interfaces of your network at the control plane level to make sure everyone got access to this new data pipe, the speeds would implicitly follow. Unfortunately, this has proven not to be the case. Measuring the total throughput of the pipe, or indeed the throughput of individual TCP/UDP flows, doesn't actually measure the customer's experience, or indeed even accurately measure the customer throughput. Customers' expectation or their implicit SLA is that they will always get a broadband throughput when they're using one of a number of throughput testing applications, so speed test basically. There are a number of other ones, but speed test is certainly the most popular. And the operator's SLA to their customers was basically an application and a customer focused throughput of 1-2 megabits a second. And they had no real way to test it with their traditional network monitoring tools, which had focused purely on the control plane or a few simple TCP metrics. I think the name alone probably highlights the problem, in that measuring a network does not necessarily measure customer experience, which is why today we're going to coin the phrase customer-centric network monitoring during the course of our discussion. And essentially what that is that it's bringing together the customer experience and the network monitoring aspects together as one tool. So customer experience management and the traditional network monitoring piece together as a single phrase and as a single tool. Without a focus on user plane content within these types of tools, customer impacts are missed. And that was certainly the case in 3G, until it was too late. Indeed, even putting the customer impact to one side, the user plane can have massive effects on the network, as we have seen. Point in case being the signaling impact on the RAN, which we've seen, to pretty devastating consequences in a number of operators globally, where they've had significant network outages, in Europe, in America, in Asia, due to rogue or poorly designed smartphone applications. We now know from these painful experience is that all data is not the same in terms of network impact. Bursty messaging versus sustained, high definition video has a very different impact and has very different requirements on the network. And 3G, this was realized too late, and unfortunately we've had these outages. Successful, LTE launches, I think, therefore, have to use real-time user plane per customer visibility as a cornerstone, so that they can see the impact, measure the expectation, and provide a successful LTE launch. Back in 2003, 2005 again, there was very little customer-centric visibility within an operator. It was really only at the genesis of CEM back at that stage. So there was no visibility of a customer, certainly of all customers all of the time, within easy reach. Workflows were certainly not orientated around the customer and the NOC. Everything was node-based, flow-based. It's really only now that problems are starting to be categorized based on customer impact. And the idea obviously being that you fix the problems that affect most customers first. So the example I always give is, what would you do if you were in the NOC and Facebook went down at the same time, say, as a cell or an ENO-B failure? So you have two alarms going off in the NOC, which one would you fix? Now, traditionally everyone would say, well, fix the cell, fix the ENO-B, that's what's under your control. But the reality is that the focus should actually be on notifying your customer care agents that Facebook is down. That should be your first action. And the reason being that customer care are going to get an awful lot of calls straight away from people trying to get onto Facebook. They'll automatically assume it's a network problem rather than a Facebook problem, and they will certainly increase the number of calls per minute to your customer care. So the idea being is that you should notify your customer care agents straight away and then look to troubleshoot the cell failure. And such an approach will basically resolve more customer issues and have a greater impact on those customers' Net Promoter Score, because you're going to have more people affected by Facebook being down than, say, a particular cell in a particular location going down at the same time. This lack of real-time, per customer, user plane visibility, as well as having no true customer experience scores at the time, has meant poor customer satisfaction. The application level throughput that they expected wasn't achieved, certainly wasn't measured, wasn't maintained, or indeed improved over time. The much higher number of support calls, there was a lack of visibility in order to be able to respond appropriately to customers. This ended up causing higher churn rates and indeed spent more engineering time and resources needed to fix these problems. However, rather than focus too much on these initial impacts, I want to discuss the good work that operators successfully did in responding to these issues, and how we can take those responses a step further and ensure a rapid and successful LTE uptake. Having installed a network monitoring system without the ability to list the customers impacted per fault in real time, the operators did realize the gap, and this is where a separate CEM system was usually installed in parallel to reprocess that network data and provide the customer-centric view that was missing. So how would we take this learning into LTE? Well, rather than buy two systems as was done in the 3G case and reprocess the data twice, now that we know this customer-centric view is needed, if we take a customer-centric approach to network monitoring, then you don't need to buy two systems. You can orientate your business around your customers such that when those alarms are raised in the NOC, you can quantify the number of customers impacted and immediately have the customer list available just a right click away. You know exactly who's affected, where they're being affected. And this ability meant faster resolution for most of the customer impacting problems. When customers did ring, customer care agents were armed with the information to resolve the tickets faster. They were happier customers, they had a faster resolution time, even though the tickets were getting a bit more complicated. Has meant less churn and less cost, and that's exactly what we need to take into LTE. We need to make sure we have that same visibility to be able to mitigate the impacts, but rather than having two systems, take the customer-centric approach and just have one. This is particularly important when you're rolling out new technologies. Early adopters, by their very nature, tend to only come once. They're going to need to have a very positive experience, or the product won't have an immediate success. Customers will churn, they'll go to someone else who can provide that experience, or the uptake will be very slow. until expectations can be delivered. And that's pretty much what happened within the 3G rollout. If you look back, the take-up of 3G services took an awful long time, and that's something that we certainly wouldn't want to see in LTE. So by being able to have this system that can measure the true customer experience, as well as being able to look at it from a node, a flow, do your call trace, etc., as a traditional network monitoring system might have, by having all of that in one system, you have the tools you need to try and ensure a rapid uptake of LTE as you roll out. LTE and EPC promises far less latency and far more speed. The customers who would benefit most from these are mass online gamers. So what you need to figure out is, where do these gamers and other high-value customers use the network most? By combining CEM view and a network monitoring view, as I say, coining the phrase customer-centric network monitoring, you can identify the cells where upgrades are most likely to capture this target market. And hence that is where, in order to maximize your profitability, that's where you should roll out first. If you upgrade that part of the network first, you can monitor the customer experience in real time and make sure the early adopters within your target market achieve or exceed their expectations. That is the key to getting a rapid rollout of LTE. Those early adopters will start to spread the news that they are reaching their expectations, and that others will then follow them and get the same experience. By focusing on customer and application level KPIs like page load time, video playback time, buffering time, rather than using purely node or TCP flow based KPIs, as you might with your traditional monitoring system, you're moving your business to the center around your customer. This is what your customers want. They know that if the video is buffering for more than 2 seconds, by and large they tend to get annoyed. They mightn't wait any longer. They will expect a lot more for a new LTE network, and that's what you need to measure, and that's what you need to track, and that's your measure for success. With the network monitoring and CEN combined, you can measure this true experience. You can react to your customer expectations of that application level throughput. You can do it within your NOC. You're not just limited to kind of checking the plumbing, shall we say, and making sure that the connectivity is right, and hoping the speed and the good customer experience will come. You're armed with a lot more than that, and can take action and ensure a good rollout. Now that we understand what's required to manage the customer's expectations to ensure that rapid and successful LTE rollout, the second area I wanted to discuss today is the operator's fundamental business model. The move to EPC LTE, it's an opportunity to revisit the current business model. In some ways, it demands that this is done. With operator share prices falling, they're reflecting more like utilities. They've lost that growth factor. Something needs to change, and both costs and revenues need to turn around so that operators become that growth stock again. And the key to that is insightful analytics. That's what you're going to need to enable this turnaround, and that's what I'm going to focus on in the next few minutes during our discussions. If you look at the cost side, there are already some very interesting figures available for LTE in comparison to 3G. The license costs for 4G have been considerably cheaper than their 3G equivalents, which is obviously great news for operators in general. For example, in the UK recently, the spectrum raised £1 billion less than was originally expected, so the cost came in at £2.34 billion versus the £3.5 billion the UK government had expected. Now, when you compare this to the £22 billion spent on 3G, that's a massive saving. And this happened in an environment where there was even more competition for the licenses, given that there were more operators bidding this time round than was previously the case in 3G. Now, from a variable cost perspective, this is great news. Even though $3.4 billion is still a very large capital outlay, it means less cost is being spread across every SMS, byte, voice call, etc. To fund that, if you were to compare it to, say, the 3G. Less optimistically, though, if you look at the operator's revenue, if you have a look at the chart on the slide there, it shows there's been a continued slide in ARPU over the last couple of years. This is projected to continue for the next couple of years unless there's a fundamental change in the business model, which is partly what we're going to talk about now in the next number of slides. The reason, though, for the actual slide is essentially increased competition internally within the market, but also the fact that voice and SMS revenues are not being compensated. So those voice and SMS revenues that are dropping are not being compensated by increases in the data volume. So how do we turn this around? How do we close the gap and push on to revenue growth again? There's a recent study I read that was quite interesting. Was done by Arthur Little and BNP Paribas, and they suggested that the data-only part of the ARPU, within Europe, on average, needed to be €17 in order to do just exactly that. So to take operators in general across Europe back into a growth model, the data ARPU needed to be €17. Now, the problem with that is that that's €7 more than is currently being generated. So what we need to figure out now is, where will we get this new net revenue? Now, when I say net revenue, so obviously you can look again at cost. What further costs could you get? You could look again at maybe Wi-Fi offload, network share, small cells, as well as the new trend of removing phone subsidies. All of that's going to help the net effect. However, a focus on greater monetization with market differentiation and new revenue streams is the only answer to truly boost that revenue side of the equation back towards that net growth. Now you ask yourself, will customers maybe pay more for the additional LTE speed? So for me, I think the jury is probably still out on that question. Again, if I take an example out of the UK, Everything Everywhere has put a £5 premium on their existing data packages. And they're being very successful. They're capturing customers. Customers are using the data. So it certainly seems to be a positive indication that people will pay that premium. However, Hutchison 3 in the UK have said when they roll out their LTE network, they're going to have no such premium. So then you've got to wonder, will Everything Everywhere be able to maintain that €5 premium if their competitors are providing the same expectation? So again, we're back to the same expectation. So if they can provide the same expectation in terms of service delivery and customer experience, will they pay that premium or not to Everything Everywhere? And I suppose increasingly engineering teams are being asked, certainly as we can see within our customers, the engineering teams are being asked to provide the network data, to the marketing teams, to the business, to enable these, analytic insights to try and get those new revenue streams. Now, obviously, the richer the data set, the greater the potential insight. Now, traditional monitoring systems and monitoring network data, don't have that correlated real-time per customer, view with the applications and the devices and all of those different dimensions. However, again, if we go back to what we were saying before, that customer-centric network monitoring approach does have that capability. So if you're feeding that enriched data set into your big data analytics platform, that's going to be the key to unlocking the insights required to innovate and discover those new revenue streams. So it's a key building block for this new analytics that's required. Now, I want to talk about analytics for the next couple of minutes. We're going to look at this from both an internal processes within the operator perspective, as well as how those insights can generate revenues from an external perspective. So if I look again at the market dynamics, what's happening at the minute, as I said before, operators are moving away from subsidizing devices, and instead they're offering more flexible SIM-only contracts. Let the customer buy the devices themselves. Now, this looks like it has the potential to mean shorter contracts with a far higher possibility of churn. So given that additional churn dynamic that's in the market, having rapid insight into both network and customer behavior readily available internally within the operator, is even more important, in order to be able to manage that churn, to know what causes it, in order to give a differentiated offering. A differentiated offering, a rapid differentiated offering has the potential to achieve that net customer growth, to prevent that churn, increase your customer satisfaction, and obviously from there drive that revenue capture. Now, without that right analytics available internally, obviously this differentiation, certainly not the rapid one, will just not be possible. Now, as I say, we're going to look at it from two perspectives, and the second one, the external one, which is something that I think is really moving the operator away from their traditional revenues, and that's when you look at it from an external perspective. And what I've listed here are 5 promising use cases that are coming to the fore. We can start to see, some initiatives, and the first one I'm going to talk about that some of you may know about is Telefónica's Dynamic Insights, or another example, similar area, is the joint venture between O2, Vodafone, and Everything Everywhere in the UK. So that joint venture between the three, those two are good examples of how operators are aggregating their data. They're obviously anonymizing it, and they're selling it on to advertisers. Now, obviously, there's a need for opt-in management in everything that we do in terms of these external initiatives. But if you look at advertising as a whole, in 2010, it was worth 500 billion annually in all its forms globally. Now, if you can get the right opt-in, it's aggregated data, it's anonymized. With the internet moving more onto mobile devices rather than the fixed line, operators, they're in prime position to capture a proportion of that 500 billion market. Similarly, when you look at, again, another external option, rather than advertisers, this time it's actually market research companies. So what we're seeing are operators partnering with market research companies, to get access to that customer-focused network data, or indeed the analysis that operators can put on top of their data. Partnering with them, providing that information to those market research companies is again another avenue of revenue that the operators can and should be looking at. Normally these market research companies work on samples rather than the complete data set that, say, an operator could provide. So it's a very, very rich data set, probably far richer than they may have been used to in the past. So both of these partnerships, the advertising and the market research, will bring new revenues, and in both cases the operator is uniquely positioned to capture value. Both are focused on customer behavior. Again, you need to be able to have that very customer application focused data set rather than a simple nodes and flows, in order to be able to enable these revenue models for your business. Now, third potential source, which again is probably even in less embryonic stages, is actually the machine-to-machine services. So within machine-to-machine services, you could do something like cargo or logistics tracking, or maybe even indeed security services, where the requirement is really around real-time per customer or per device visibility. A fourth one is the potential revenue opportunity driven by analytics. Could be selling the data onto device manufacturers or application developers. So, all of the device manufacturers won't have the same granularity or richness of data set that could potentially be provided by the operators. Likewise, the application developers. Providing that information to both the device and the application developers, can help them target and package their offering better, and deliver a better package to their target market. Again, there's a key value in that, a value that could be captured by the operators. And finally, a fifth one, which again could be enabled. It's not something that we have seen really take off yet, but again, as I say, very embryonic stages with some of these. But a fifth source could potentially be enabled by providing personalized advertising. So again, within the auspices of opt-in management, via partnerships with key OTT players, the operator could provide the level of insights such that you could build profiles in order to enable this personal advertising, as I say, within the relative opt-in management. Again, key value can be driven out of a more targeted or personalized advertising offering. Again, the operator enabling this could rightfully capture a lot of that value. All of these revenue sources have a number of common requirements. Demographics, device. A lot of it's centered around content, so whether that be at an application level, maybe web usage, duration of some of that usage, whether it be frequency of use, time of day, a need like in the machine-to-machine for real-time, per customer, per device visibility. So all of these, I suppose, common requirements can be enabled via a very customer-centric network monitoring view of your network, rather than just giving a very TCP node-based view of your network. You're not going to get that rich insight, which a lot of these new revenue models will require in order to deliver on them successfully. Again, obviously, the richer the data set means the more effective these new revenue models can be, therefore the more value that can be captured by the operator. Big data analytics, it's on a maturity curve, from the lower to the higher. value in terms of real time being at the very highest value. Operators grouping together certainly can offer more compelling offers to compete against some of the larger OTT players. So if you decide not to go with a partnership approach, or maybe you do a partnership approach with some of the OTT players, but for those who possibly aren't interested, maybe as a industry or coming together, operators together can provide a more compelling offer to compete against these OTT players. Join could potentially be a good example there. So I suppose within 3G, CEM was considered a secondary system that came in. It was purchased after the network monitoring system, after it was realized that there was a gap in capabilities. Now with an LTE, if you don't have the right platform, you could end up with yet another vertical system for analytics, and you repeat the same problem. And what we can see is that in particular marketing are now demanding from the network side of the business that level of visibility. So rather than buying indeed even 3 systems where you had a network monitoring system, a CEM system, and now potentially an analytics system, the idea that we're proposing is that if you take one system that has a customer-centric monitoring view, you can actually orientate your business around the customer, you can provide your building block for analytics, as well as driving a successful, in this case, LTE launch. As with any new product launch, it's vital to manage the customer's expectations, as we said, and it's also vital to put in place a business model that works for the marketplace. So we've touched on both of them this afternoon. And EPC and LTE rollouts are absolutely no different than the other markets. You've got to manage customer expectations, and you've got to put a business model in that works for everyone. 3G was sold on the promise of mobile data, broadband speeds, everywhere and everywhere. LTE is no different. Indeed, it has the additional burden of expectation, shall we say, that not only does it have to do that, but the rates are a hell of a lot higher, the latencies are a lot less. For UMTS, operators bought a network monitoring system which measured the nodes and flows, as I say, more the plumbing of the network rather than a true customer experience. Now over time, as we talked about with the Genesis CM, people put in this parallel CEM system, they reprocessed all the network data to give that customer view. Within LTE, there's an opportunity to get it right first time. If you take the customer-centric approach to your network monitoring, combine CEM and traditional monitoring so that you have customer impact, you have your per application, per customer metrics, you have your traditional call trace and packet capture, and they're all just a right click away in real time. By combining all of that together, you can prioritize your knock event resolution, on the basis of customer impact, using real-time customer experience metrics that correlate back to your Net Promoter Score, rather than just using, as we say, a nodes and flows approach. With that'll mean that you'll be able to fix the right problems that affect most customers and deliver on those customer expectations. LTE also has the opportunity, or provides the opportunity, to expand on some of those early stage initiatives that we talked about in the marketplace, to try and arrest the gradual slide in the business model and try and open up new revenue growth again, bring new analytics driven new revenue streams online. And again, engineering teams, as we talk to our customers, are being asked to try and provide this data. Really, the same requirements, as we said, are needed in order to deliver on it. And the key enabler for all of these new revenue streams, as we said, it's a real time, it's a customer data set, all of which is driven out of that customer centric network monitoring approach. So if you do it once, you will fulfill the NOC requirement around improving Net Promoter Score to orientate your business around your customer, but also give you a key building block to actually drive these new analytics. Without taking such an approach, you'll end up with that lower value subset of analytics. You won't be able to get that greater insight, to extract that greater value from those new partnerships and the new revenue streams. And the operator is going to miss out on a golden opportunity, to take full advantage of their data assets to, as I say, arrest that slide and really bring back growth into their businesses. That's all I had today. I hope you found it useful. I certainly thank you for the time you spent, and I'm going to be online now for a short time, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate, fire ahead and ask them, and I'll answer them in due course as they come through. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Paul, for your insights and thoughts there. As I said, Paul will be available to take your questions. You can ask them just by typing into the text box on the main page of this webinar. He'll respond in real time. Thank you very much for joining us today on telecoms.com.